So joining me today, we've got Suzanne Scott, the General Manager of San Antonio River Authority, Jonathan Quarles, the founder and CEO of SolAir Water, and Fabode, the co-founder and CEO of Varuna Technologies. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I think this is really the first one about water at this entire event. So before we really dig in, can I have you all just give a quick introduction? We'll start down there with you, Jonathan.
Sure. Jonathan Quarles, founder and CEO of SolAir Water, which is based in Flint, Michigan. It's a premier bottled water that is actually made by sun and air.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Scott. I'm General Manager of the San Antonio River Authority. I've been at the River Authority for 20 years and really working to show our commitment to safe, clean, and enjoyable creeks and rivers here within the San Antonio River Basin.
Good morning. My name is Seyi Fabode, CEO and co-founder of Varuna, and we're a water analytics company focused on providing system visibility to small and medium-sized water systems. We drop sensors in their distribution system, presents a dashboard that allows their operations teams to deliver clean water efficiently.
Thank you. I think we might need one more microphone up here, actually, if someone could bring us a mic. But while we're waiting for that, my first question is really for you, Seyi. In preparing for this panel, we talked about how there's so much emphasis on climate change, different technologies, energy, mobility, transportation, but that water sort of gets left out of the conversation. So why do you think that is?
So yes, it's quite infuriating, frankly, because I think several reasons, but the one that sticks out the most is, for the most part, we just assume that the water we're drinking is clean. There's just this inherent assumption until we have a shock, like the Flints of the world, Autin sometime last year, and this state of this cognitive state of thinking, you know what, it's fine until something's wrong, applies when we're thinking about GHGs. And the quite interesting thing is that water vapor is actually a greenhouse gas as well. And folk just ignore it in the whole conversation. All these companies throwing out sustainability goals and funding for, Jeff Bezos talked about putting $1 billion or $10 billion or whatever it was towards sustainability. And when you read the text, they never really touch on water because of that assumption. We never really get to the point where we should think about it as part of the cycle and the mix of all we need to do to ensure just a healthy society. We don't think about it as public health when we should. So, yeah.
Suzanne, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the panel today. Just a couple of things from our perspective. As it relates to climate change and water, we've focused a lot on flood control issues and sustainable development. And as we look at the potential threat of climate change here in our community, really the more opportunities for flooding happening are a serious concern. So we have to think about how to mitigate flooding within our community. And as part of our climate action plan here in San Antonio, we have several strategies to look at flood control. We are trying to update all the flood maps and models to make sure that they are looking at the future to determine what the impact of changing land uses is going to have on flooding within our watershed. I mean, the significant challenge that we have is we are in what is called flash flood alley. So it's the biggest natural disaster threat we have here. So as we build more and add more impervious cover, that is adding to the threat of flooding and the threat to life and property within our basin. So that's a big part of climate change here, is addressing flooding in a more proactive way. Also, that also then means water quality threats. The more impervious cover you have, the more threats to water quality, because all of that pollution from those impervious cover, either rooftops, parking lots, et cetera, all that ends up in your rivers and creeks and then threatens the ecosystem of our rivers and creeks. So we are being very proactive about looking at sustainable land use practices, using nature, grass, bioswales, other things like that, to filter out pollutants from water. So instead of landscaping on a development just being ornamental, make that landscaping functional. And I think we're really going to have to get creative about a growing city and how we start to think about how to manage our land while we look at climate change issues in the future.
And Jonathan, you came all the way from Flint, Michigan. Thank you for being here today. I think that most people in this room, or maybe everyone in the country, when they hear Flint, the first thing that comes to mind is the water crisis. And like Seyi mentioned, you don't really think about it until something's wrong, but it's pretty inconceivable that something this horrible could happen, and it's been like 6 years now and it's still not completely resolved. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the failures that led to the situation and why it's not easily solvable?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. I'm a native of Flint, Michigan. I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. And quite honestly, I wasn't really thoughtful or active at all around water prior to the Flint Water Crisis. And so when the Flint Water Crisis happened, I had family members and friends that suffered and even died from this crisis. So it's a little personal for me. And so, I had people calling asking me, what can we do to help? So there's people that wanted to donate and people wanted to bring water, plastic bottled water and things like that. But for me, I just knew that I wanted to do something more. To answer your question as far as the failure, it was, I wouldn't say it as simply, but it was a combination of a few things. We had an emergency manager at the time and was just looking to cut expenses, and wasn't really responsible about the implications and being as thorough as possible with making sure that the transition from Detroit water to the water that was transferred, and not coating the lead pipes, which then leached into the water. And then after they realized it, it was reported all the way up to the governor's office, and they didn't move fast enough. And so I can remember my mother used to bring me, so I live in Detroit right now, but I remember my mother bringing me alkaline water from a granary in Flint. And I remember tasting this water and it was just like, Mom, this doesn't taste right. It was really cloudy, which was really different. And usually alkaline water doesn't really have a taste to it. And so I remember asking my mom, she's like, yeah, something went wrong with the water, but no one really knew what was happening. So people started posting videos about this brown water, and no one was, and nothing. It took almost a year till someone actually realized that there was a problem. So that was one. And again, I always want to say that it's still not fixed. And I think originally when SolAir was created, I partnered with a company called Zero Mass Water, who has a technology called Source that's able to make water out of air, and they're based in Arizona. And so we wanted to figure out a way in which we can provide a solution to the city. We spent 6 to 8 months literally doing like a listening tour to the community, because the biggest thing we need to gain trust. People in Flint did not trust anyone. Even if we told them how wonderful this technology was, we showed them the numbers and the data, they did not trust anyone, especially outsiders. And so we spent 6 to 8 months investing our own time and money to really gain the trust, teaching them about the technology and getting them on board and asking them, what is it we can do for the community opposed to prescribing? And so it came out, most people started asking, we want to create jobs, we want clean drinking water. And so at that point, I'm also an angel investor. I said, I will fund a local Flint entrepreneur to start bottling this water that we're creating out of air. We donated panels to a recreational center. We also donated to the city hall, and we were trying to figure out a way to get it to all of the residents, which is a very costly matter. But up to this point, we're now bottling the water, but we also are providing jobs, and we are creating a whole lot of, it's more of a movement now than anything else, but it's not fixed. The water is still not fixed. I want to be very clear. It is still not 100% fixed, and so for me, this provides a platform, SolAir specifically, to be able to talk about what's going on in Flint and any other marginalized communities.
And I'll just add to that. So we gathered a bunch of historic data on water quality across the US at the start of Varuna. And one of the things we quickly realized and learned even more from this book called Troubled Water by Seth Stigall is that water quality standards and regulations across the US are actually at a level that enables water systems to get away with a lot. There are tens of thousands of new chemicals released into our water systems every year. The last regulation, and I think only about 25 of those chemicals are actually regulated as contaminants in the water we drink. Studies haven't been done on a few of these, and there are a few that we know will cause long-term effects, like the ones we've seen in Flint, that frankly no one is doing anything about it. So the work companies like his is doing is, it stuns me that it's not national at this point. But just to touch on how Flint is not an anomaly, unfortunately, and we're fast heading into a future where the weapons we currently use the tools we use are for a battle that we lost a long time ago. But thanks for the work you do.
Yeah, well, kind of to follow up on that, Seyi, I know you worked in the energy industry before for a long time, and it seems like the water industry is maybe about a decade behind energy as far as progress in technologies. Do you think that with new technologies and more distributed systems, is there a chance for water to sort of learn from lessons learned on the energy side, or do you think there's an opportunity for water to catch up?
Yeah, so before, I spent about 17, 18 years on the power utility side. I was in operations for a 1,000 megawatt combined cycle gas plant in London. And this was between 2002 to about 2008, 2009. The wild thing is some of the things we're building and providing to water systems right now come from some of the learnings when I was in the power sector. And it stuns me. Our focus is on small and medium-sized systems that the traditional solution providers aren't going to because they can't get multi-million-dollar contracts from them. But we've brought some of the advanced technology to bear. We're using machine learning to help them predict contaminant plumes flowing through their distribution systems. We're giving them sensors that are lower cost and directional so that they can at least then do further tests once we've told them there might be a problem in this part of the city. And we're a year old. We work with 5 going to 7 utilities now. And I will say, I came in worried about it's 10 years, will they be interested? But then we'd go into the workshop where the technicians who were taking these truck rolls to go take the samples work, and they're on their phones playing World of Warcraft or Call of Duty with friends in other cities. So the immediate thing that came to mind when I saw that was, these are digital individuals in an analog world, and if we provide them a solution, they'll take it, and that's been the case. They prefer helping us to reset our sensors in the field rather than driving to go collect samples several times a day. We've saved them truck rolls, and so I have hope. And most of these folk in the water utility industry, drinking water space, they wake up wanting to give us clean water. They just have old tools. So I'm happy, excited that there's there's work going on and people are really interested, but I'm still just upset at how little attention we collectively pay to water in this country. But, yeah.
Jonathan touched on community engagement and outreach, and Suzanne, I know the River Authority has some really great community programs. Can you talk about them a little bit and what sort of reaction you've seen from the community?
Absolutely. We have a very knowledgeable community here in San Antonio and this region really about water issues. We have worked for quite some time because we have many of you know, we have a sole source aquifer for a long time. Of course, SAWS, the San Antonio water system, has diversified our water supply over the years, but for a long, long time, we were very reliant exclusively on the Edwards Aquifer for our water supply. So we have a hugely knowledgeable population about water in our community, and we are fortunate in that regard. So not only do they know about where their drinking water comes from, the Edwards Aquifer, they're also very attached to it. I mean, we see on weather channels, we know during, when we're in the middle of the summer and we're not getting a lot of rain, people know exactly what that J17 well means and how that's going to trigger drought restrictions, how many times you can water your lawn, et cetera. So we're coming from a very knowledgeable base of citizens here within our community. And that has translated into many of our programs with the San Antonio River. Obviously, people love the river and they're very proud of it, and it's part of our heritage and our culture about why the missions were established here, why the city was established, the tourism that really comes here to see the river. So we have engaged citizens on a variety of platforms to make sure that they stay engaged with decisions related to the river and the ecosystem that we are protecting. We've put citizens committees together to determine the future development of the river. We had a stakeholder committee called the San Antonio River Oversight Committee that helped really form the vision for what we now know as the Museum Reach, which extends the river up to the Pearl, and the Mission Reach, which has an ecosystem restoration project that has taken the river and transformed it into a beautiful linear park south of town. So we had a committee that was together for 16 years that guided the design and the development and the implementation of that huge river improvements project. And it was a model for how citizen involvement can continue to give insight into development. They worked on getting funding strategies done. They helped pass bond issues. They helped pass tax referendums. They were very passionate about getting that project done. And if it had not been for the citizen engagement, that project, those improvements would have never happened and transformed our community. We've now taken that model on San Pedro Creek is another very important project that we have. We have a citizens committee that's guiding the development and implementation of another transformational project on a creek that we have. We have another committee that's working on a future project called Westside Creeks Restoration. It's an ecosystem restoration on creeks on the west side of our community. Then we've also developed a very involved what we call watershed-wise warriors, that people can come that are just truly passionate about the river and want to get engaged. We have them out doing trash pickups after rain events. They're also helping us with some of our establishment of some of our new ecosystems that we've planted, some of our native vegetation areas. The Texas Public Radio locally has a group that comes out and helps with a planting of some trees that we've done. So people are very, very engaged. We have a very active master naturalist program here in San Antonio. Citizen scientists, people are out all the time working with us, doing iNaturalist, for example. You can go out on the river and take a picture of a bird and put it on a database and find out where that bird is from, and then talk with other people within the community about what you're seeing in the natural environment. So we're very, very fortunate through our community engagement. We always want more because we believe we can do so much better if people are engaged in the decisions that we're making. We continue to advocate for citizen involvement in everything that we do. And yes, we have been very successful, and I think the public enjoys the opportunity to be involved.
I was getting really excited hearing about how you can chat with other people in your community about different birds that you've seen. So I'm really excited to hear about that program. Kind of sticking with this, focus on the community. Jonathan, I know that your company is made up primarily of people from Flint or Flint residents. Why was that so important to you to keep everything in the community?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that, as we sat down and we had, in the conversations we had in our community, is that most of the citizens in Flint wanted to figure out a way to redefine how we are defined as Flint. So me growing up in Flint, we were defined as the most violent city per capita every year. Now we're defined by the water. And so it's almost a joke. I mean, when I talk, in other places outside of Michigan, people laugh when they say, okay, I make water out of air in Flint. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to drink that. But what we wanted to do with SolAir and the whole mission behind it was to create a movement. This movement that redefines how Flint will forever be remembered, and actually taking responsibility for that for ourselves. So community engagement is the core of our business. And like I said, we are selling water all over the world. We're not just a Flint water and we're only selling it in Flint or in Michigan. But some of the things that we're doing, like a percentage of everything we make, it's actually 8% of everything we make annually goes back to a Flint Water Fund, which is managed specifically by the Community Foundation of Greater Flint and not the government. We wanted to be very transparent. We also wanted to make sure we had a responsible fiscal partner that's not political. We also we have co-branding opportunities. So as an entrepreneur, I want to make sure that other entrepreneurs we're collaborating with. We recently were just in the New York Fashion Week a week or two ago, where we have merchandise. And so I'm also like a fashion designer. Make a lot of the clothes that I wear. And so we had our lifestyle brand, which is Water to the People. And the other line that's going to be coming out soon is Be the Flow. But really kind of just changing the perspective of making Flint cool again. And so I work and do co-branding with local artists as well as local apparel companies in Flint, Michigan. And we're getting ready to do another fashion show in Flint, Michigan. But we're doing things like that, like very strategically with just Flint-based businesses. And I was very careful and thoughtful about getting Flint talent. We have a partnership with the University of Michigan Flint, where we work with their marketing students. We also have a data scientist on our team now for at least a semester, and we're doing the whole public-private partnerships. We're engaged with the city council and the mayor's office, and they are a big partner of ours. The Genesee Chamber of Commerce are also a partner of ours, and we're hoping to get them to buy our water for all of the businesses downtown. But really just changing the way that this is what I tell the community, and this is like my family. So I tell them this is our water. This is not SolAir. This is not my project. If we fail, it's because of us. And so I want us to get out of the idea of helping and looking for the government or just any other entity to help us, but us to have our own self-determination and create our own jobs and create our own opportunities and to be responsible about what we actually are ingesting in our bodies. And so we have some wonderful things that we're going to be launching pretty soon. But right now we're in hospitality space. We're looking to do retail. Up to this point, I've been self-funding the company. So I'm now talking to investors or exploring opportunities with investors. So if there's any investors out there or you know anyone, I am definitely, because the thing is we have to scale. And we've actually been talking to some, I can't say the name, but some big hotel brands that love what we're doing and want to figure out how we can get them involved in their boutique and luxury hotels, because our water is a premium water. It's comparative to like the Voss and the Fiji. It's a very premium water, and just a little bit how it actually works, because sometimes people don't understand. We have it's called a hydro panel. It looks like a solar panel that does not. It's off the grid. It's 100% off the grid, 100% off the grid. It's powered by the sun. It extracts condensation from the air. It goes through a double distillment process that's then mineralized, and that's all a part of the proprietary technology. So we literally have these panels all over the world, specifically in deserts where there's no access to water or to electricity, and that's what makes our water unique. And so that's why it's SolAir. That's how the name came about, SolAir. But we want to be able to, eventually my whole personal goal is to get them in all the houses in Flint. That's a longer term play. But for now, we are continuously working on projects where we can donate panels that will supply and support all of the recreational centers. That's kind of like my next phase of what we want to do from donating. And then we also, with that money that we give back, helping people with their water bills. Because in Flint and even in Detroit, there's people that have their water has been turned off because they can't afford to pay for water. So one thing is the infrastructure, but another thing is people can't afford to pay for water bills that are water that is continuously increasing. And that's a whole nother conversation. But we're happy to be a part of all those conversations, and we're going to do our part. We're a four-team business right now, but we're looking to grow, and we're looking at being impactful in what we do.
So my last question for the panel, because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions from the audience, but we've been hearing a lot about the changing workforce. Yesterday I was fortunate to moderate a panel on workforce development. We really talked a lot about how the workplace and the workforce is changing, and I think this panel is, really representative of that. More women, people of color in leadership positions, which I think is really important. So could each of you just sort of speak to how your personal experience has sort of, affected you in that way? And I guess, Jonathan, I'll start back with you.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question.
Can you, personal experience, your background, has that, kind of brought you to where you are now and given you some of the perspective that you have now?
Sure. So I've always been an entrepreneur. So when I was 8, I started my first company. It was actually a paper route. And so throughout the years, I was fortunate to have a short stint in working in corporate America. I've also worked for a mayor. So I got opportunity to see how government works. I used to be a lobbyist also. So having that public and private opportunity and learning how to run a multi-billion-dollar company, how to help take a multi-million-dollar company public, which I was on the finance team for, and then to be a full-time entrepreneur, the struggles and startups and things like that, that's been something that, for me, I'm actually writing a book about it right now because I want to be able to help empower and encourage not just young people, but even people that are currently think that their career, they're ready for a change within their corporate career. I call it corporate dropouts. But those people that want to make that transition, there's a challenge in doing that. And so helping them to kind of, through all of my mistakes and failures, and then some of the things that I've done, a few things that I've done right, how do I help kind of leverage that and help impact other people so they can kind of take that leap of faith and do what they're passionate about and what they can impact without the world.
Great. Suzanne?
Well, thank you. I used to, as I said when I started, I've been at the River Authority for 20 years, and I've been the general manager since 2007. But when I started at the River Authority, I would walk into rooms within the water industry, and I would be the only woman in the room. The water industry, at least in Texas, is very dominated by men, and men engineers at that. And when I became general manager, I was the first non-engineer and woman to be of course, the general manager of our River Authority. But then I found out that I was the first woman to be general manager throughout the state. So it's changing now, of course. There are many more women that are getting involved. But what I like to see is we're seeing a lot of women engineers and a lot of women scientists, and they're out there really making a difference through the work that they're doing. And they are really bringing a new perspective, I think, to the whole talk about water. And more you're starting to see these engineers and these scientists talking more about sustainability and environmental issues and restoration and getting back to our role as really nurturers of the earth. I mean, we have to have this harmony between people and nature, and I see more and more, and of course I'm biased as a woman. I think a woman brings a different perspective to a conversation and is not afraid to talk more about the sensitivity side of an issue that may be more black and white. It's an engineering issue. We don't really need to bring much emotion or passion to that. But I think you do. And I think we all need to get more free and open to be more expressive of why these issues are important to us. This idea of caring and this idea of passion. It's okay to bring that into a boardroom. It's okay to start talking about things, because otherwise nothing's going to happen if you don't have an emotional attachment to the things that you're doing every day. So I've seen that change with more and more voices, not only women, but also younger people coming in. I am just thrilled that we're adding more and more millennials to our staff. They are bringing in a totally new perspective. They are seeing the urgency of addressing these issues today that we know are affecting our planet and are affecting our natural resources. And that urgency that they bring is really making all of us move a lot faster. I'm from a governmental entity. Government tends to move slowly, and these younger people are saying, no, we can't move slowly. We have to move, we have to pick up the pace. And I think that's challenging for all of us. So having the younger people, people with new perspectives, trying to, and people that don't care about failing. Look, you only learn a lot of times if you make mistakes. And I think if you're able to realize that we're not all going to get it perfect, but to bring that kind of energy into a room is very exciting. So I think the future is bright in this area, and it's because people are caring about what we're doing here in the areas of water.
Erin Hardick and I had the opportunity to sit down with a woman from IBM a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about how once the terms sustainability and talking about clean energy and green energy became more popular, she started to see more women come into the field, and she said to her it didn't really matter how they got there. If they were using sustainability as the door to bring people in, that didn't matter. So I think that's really important that you sort of embrace that.
Yes, absolutely.
As well. And Seyi?
I'm an engineer, but I tend to love examples from biology. My mom was a biologist about why we need the industry to change. And I was telling someone earlier, there's this thing called the edge effect. It's sort of the point between when the forest and the savanna meet, and it is the richest point. It's where you get new plants, new organisms growing because of that diversity of the ecosystem. And if there's anything that I truly hope the water space recognizes about the future is that unless that edge effect is allowed to thrive, because truth be told, we're not sitting and having great conversations about how sexy the water utility is. No one does that. We need to start speaking in a language that will allow people, millennials, folk who truly care about this ecosystem that water is a critical part of, that we don't pay as much attention to. I truly think that's the only way forward here, and I'm excited to run into folk at conferences, and I'm like, wow, what got you into water? And as you were saying, it's those terms that we're now bringing into the industry that we didn't use before. It's Flint. It's hearing that things like that can happen in what we consider a developed country, and just a desire to have some impact. So I'm excited as well. Super excited about how things are about to change for the better in water.
Thank you for your work, everyone on the panel. And Jonathan, I especially appreciate the intersection within which you work of so many varied sectors, but the crossover between the community beneficial work married to the business community work that you do, I think is something that we all benefit from paying attention to. So my question to you is, here in San Antonio, we have a thriving tech community. We have one of the most forward-thinking and energetic growth sectors in San Antonio in that community. Tomorrow, I'll be meeting with the CEO of Geekdom. One of my concepts that I want to talk to him about is the idea of supporting NGOs in the same level and capacity that they support tech. They act as a tech incubator, where the bottom line both remains the dollar figure, yet Geekdom hosts annual tech datathons in which folks will get together for 3 days and work on community issues like climate change or infrastructure or some of these other issues. So Mike, what would you say to the CEO of one of these tech community leaders in encouraging him to support the NGO sector and the community beneficial sectors?
You know, I think you just said it. I mean, the fact in which you guys are able to utilize data and really marry the tech to NGOs, that might be the angle. Because for some reason, it's funny. There's two things that I find is very trendy right now. It's this word entrepreneur and this word tech, like tech, anything. And most people don't even understand what the difference or what they are. But NGOs have a huge play and that's one of the things that, when we put together SolAir, we wanted to make sure that we connected all the dots between the public and private. And what I mean by public and private, not just the government and business or private sector, but also the philanthropic communities or NGOs, because this is how I call it the triangle effect. Before we started off with SolAir, we had to get buy-in. And so my first partner and the first person I met with was the CEO of the community foundation, because I wanted to donate these panels to the community, but I couldn't afford to do it personally. They had grant money for it. And then we had to bring in the government for them to kind of understand. We never asked the government for a dime. And we were very thoughtful about that because we wanted to make sure, again, that we weren't looked at as a lot of these other private sectors kind of coming in and benefiting off of a crisis. And so we leveraged the community foundation, which has to this day is our partner. So that's why we're giving 8% everything we make back to them. And so we're supporting each other. They supported us, we supported them. But at the end of the day, it's supporting the people. That's why I would say water to the people. I wanted to call our organization a social enterprise, but we're also a for-profit. So we can't technically say that. But we leverage the three triangles, and that's philanthropic, nonprofit, government, and then business and private sector.
And if I could just add to that, I think it's important these nonprofit entities bring a voice that is very important, and I think you mentioned it. And I think if there was going to be any sort of investment to inspire these nonprofits to get more engaged in these issues, is a lot of it is they need to get educated about issues and how the connecting of the dots that you mentioned are so important. People tend to get focused on one issue in water, for example, water supply, which is very important. I'm not saying that water supply is not important, but there's so many more aspects of water and managing water and being entrepreneurial as it relates to water and trying to bring technology into these issues. And I think the more that we can have a conversation about that and getting more people engaged, that's going to drive leadership, that's going to drive the city and the county and the state, particularly the state here, to make changes in the way that we're talking about water in our community. It doesn't need to be if you take care of water, then you're for the environment, and that means you're against economic development. That's not true. It's not an either-or situation. You can protect the environment and have economic development. So I think it's really getting those nonprofits to get that voice out there and anything that could be done to support that. And obviously they need money to do that, to get engagement and to get out there in the community. But I think that's really going to be important throughout this state particularly, is to change the narrative of how we talk about protecting our environmental resources in the context of promoting economic development.
Seyi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, it's well said. I do think just to touch on that point, a lot more foundations are starting to pay attention, and if it's figuring out how to get the foundations to fund tech to help the NGOs or in whatever way, I do think there's a lot more awareness on the money side about the need to support the entities that are currently doing the work. So, yeah.
All right. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists, and I think if anyone has questions, we can continue the conversation at lunchtime. Thank you all.